If I lived in a war zone and the currency collapsed and I don't have an American bank in the war zone and the local bank is not trustworthy, at that point I'll adopt Bitcoin as my bank and I'll adopt Bitcoin as my currency, but that's because law and order broke down in that war zone for me. As long as I live in China, I'll use a Chinese bank and the Chinese currency. And when I live in the US, I'll use the US banks and the US currency. But you will see examples. You're seeing it right now. In Lebanon, they've abandoned the local currency and they're dollarizing because the banks failed, the currency failed. And people from Lebanon will tell you that dollar is the currency.
In a world where digital currencies are rapidly gaining traction, Michael Saylor, executive chairman and co-founder of MicroStrategy, firmly believes that Bitcoin is poised to eclipse gold as a leading asset. Saylor presents a highly bullish stance on Bitcoin, suggesting it will outperform gold, leading to a complete transition of gold investors to Bitcoin. He bases his argument on the digital nature of Bitcoin, viewing it as the digital synthetic successor to gold, with faster appreciation rates, lower costs of custody, and no counterparty risks. He also highlights the decentralized nature of Bitcoin's blockchain network, which offers protection against inflation and a store of value due to its limited supply cap. MicroStrategy's investment in Bitcoin since August 2020 has proven successful, with a 140% increase in the asset's value, significantly outperforming other indexes and commodities. Saylor contrasts this performance with gold, which he sees as a failure due to its slow technological progression, centralizing tendency, high holding costs, and constant debasement by gold miners. Saylor, describing himself as a Bitcoin realist, predicts that the future of Bitcoin will involve large institutions, corporations, and churches, indicating the need for custodial and banking infrastructure for Bitcoin. He explains that due to regulatory requirements, it's not feasible for corporate leaders to self-custody Bitcoin. Let us now quickly get into the video and listen to Saylor himself as he discusses Bitcoin.
As people lose confidence in the Western banking system, and if they lose confidence in the dollar, then it catalyzes them to want to go to either barter, where they're directly bartering oil for food or oil for natural gas or commodities for manufactured products. They may consider that, or they look for other commodity monies and other commodity monetary networks. I think in the near term that creates inefficiency and to a certain degree a bit of chaos. Like right now, the debate of will Russia take rupees and will the Indians trade with the Chinese using CNY, and then who do I want to trust and what now do I want to trust? So there's a lot of chaos and a lot of inefficiency and a lot of friction, but it is inevitable. In the extreme, in theory, an Austrian economist would say, when the money fails, we're all ripped back to Stone Age barter. So in the extreme case, if there is no money or monetary network trusted by anybody, then you're going to barter, and you're just going to barter weapons for food, for commodities, for services. And of course, it's Stone Age barter, but the economy shrinks because barter is obscenely inefficient. So hence, maybe we'd like to have a commodity money and we start searching. The king commodity isn't gold. The king commodity is Bitcoin, but the conventional commodity is gold. So when you start thinking about trading $1 billion of gold for $1 billion of fertilizer, the question becomes, A, how do you settle the gold? It's obscenely expensive to move it back and forth. B, it's not fast. How do I move it back and forth 100 times a month? And then C, how do I avoid getting ripped off, because you'll probably have it rehypothecated and inflated. In the history of gold, right? The fiction of gold is it's sound money. It's never been sound money. The history of gold is I can show you an incident every decade for the last 4,000 years where some ruler cheated using gold, debased the gold, issued notes against the gold, issued IOUs on the gold, or defaulted on the gold. It didn't just happen under Nixon. It didn't just happen under Roosevelt. It's happened over and over again. And it will happen again because gold itself isn't suitable as a high-velocity money. It's failed as high-velocity money for 150 years. So I think what will happen is the free market will will scrounge around and experiment, trying all sorts of barter arrangements, trying swap arrangements, swapping the rupee for the ruble, swapping the CNY for some, name your favorite African currency you want to swap for. Don't know if there is one. And at some point, then they'll realize, well, I didn't trust the dollar, but why do I trust the Chinese more, right? I'm just moving from one currency system to another currency system. Some of them will try gold, some of them will try commodities. Gradually, people will discover Bitcoin, and they'll start to realize that the solution to the problem is Bitcoin, because it is high velocity money, which is not corruptible. But that won't happen quickly. That will happen in a slow boil over the course of 1, 2, 3 decades. And I would say that the de-dollarification, or the embracing of commodity money, it's an auspicious catalyst on the periphery. That now the unthinkable is now thinkable. It's now clear that we have certain factions with money that are trying to figure out what they do in a world without the Western banking system, and they don't have a good answer yet.
Earlier this month, the U.S. Federal Reserve signaled a pause, which could be a tailwind for Bitcoin moving forward, as easing monetary policy is known to see investors make riskier bets. Saylor is convinced that the recent bank failures and the regulatory uncertainty surrounding cryptocurrencies will work in favor of the Bitcoin, considering its reputation as the safe haven. According to Saylor, Bitcoin is the most secure network, a most secure asset. You'll see a consistent flow of capital flowing from the rest of the crypto ecosystem to Bitcoin. He further talks about the use cases of the mass adoption of Bitcoin and why it is a fact and not some conjure-up statement.
There's incredible, extraordinary inertia in the Western world, between Western Europe and the United States, and all the banks that trade and all the institutions that trade and the dollar. And that inertia is going to continue to support that system for a long, long time. The right way to think of it is Bitcoin is about $500 billion of monetary value right now against $500 trillion of financial instruments that are somewhat liquid, that have value. And so that makes it 10 basis points. And so what reasonably should happen is it will, on the edge, continue to encroach and creep up, and it'll go from being 0.1% to 0.5% to 1% to 2% to 4% to 6% to 8%. But when Bitcoin is 10 million a coin, right, it still might not be 10, 15%. It will be one of a number of assets, and it will gradually drain off monetary energy. But there will be other assets. All assets are in competition with each other. It's not just currencies. Bitcoin is in competition with gold. Bitcoin is in competition with your second Airbnb apartment that you buy in order to generate rents off it. It's in competition with commercial real estate, in competition with ETFs, bond funds, not just sovereign bonds. It's in competition with corporate debt and mortgage-backed securities and the like. And all of these assets are in competition as a store of value. And then you have all these currencies in competition with each other, the US dollar and the CNY and every other currency. As long as nation states exist, they'll have currency. And the assets will continue to compete. And then if you happen to be in that situation where you live in a country where you don't have a reliable currency, if I lived in a war zone and the currency collapsed, and I don't have an American bank in the war zone, and the local bank is not trustworthy, at that point I'll adopt Bitcoin as my bank, and I'll adopt Bitcoin as my currency. But that's because law and order broke down in that war zone for me. As long as I live in China, I'll use a Chinese bank and the Chinese currency. And when I live in the U.S., I'll use the U.S. banks and the U.S. currency. But you will see examples. You're seeing it right now. In Lebanon, they've abandoned the local currency and they're dollarizing because the banks failed, the currency failed. And people from Lebanon will tell you that dollar is the currency. And in El Salvador, after their civil war, their currency failed, so they adopted the dollar. If people are able to adopt the dollar, they may, but you can see right now with the clamp down on stable coins, they may have a hard time adopting the dollar. So the one thing that everybody can adopt is Bitcoin.
Over the past couple weeks, though, ordinals and BRC20 tokens have taken center stage as transaction fees skyrocketed. It has kicked off many discussions within the Bitcoin community over whether the network was being attacked and if these transactions should be censored. Saylor chatted with Decrypt at the Bitcoin 2023 conference in Miami last week about ordinals, BRC20 inscriptions, and whether they might constitute unregistered securities. Saylor has embraced ordinals as a positive development on the Bitcoin network, although he said many of the early use cases aren't serious and veer towards being more speculative. One of the top-performing Bitcoin ordinals collections has been Bitcoin Frogs, according to CryptoSlam. It's a spin-off of the Peep of the Frog meme coin craze that's taken the NFT community by storm. If BRC20 tokens are viewed as fungible tokens to issue unregistered securities, there's a lot of objection to that because it's unethical. It's illegal, and you can't blame the community for objecting to that, Saylor said. However, if they are issued and regulated ethically and legally, he said, there's no issue. It all comes down to the use case and perception. What if I was using them to tokenize all of the stocks and ETFs trading on NASDAQ so that individuals can take personal custody of their shares of stock instead of leaving them locked up with a centralized custodian, he said. If it was presented that way, then Bitcoiners would love it. According to the MicroStrategy co-founder and executive chairman, however, he sees economically sound use cases, but he can also imagine unethical, stupid things. Like many Bitcoiners, Saylor believes it's best to let the free market function. People should invest in what they believe in and are free to criticize something they think is silly, but should not work to censor them. What do you think would be the fate of the BRC20 token and ordinals going forward? Let us know your thoughts below. Also, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. Thanks for watching.